Welcome to the web series, The Hero's Call, where champions of safety and justice in the community are profiled. The series is co-hosted by attorney Marc Diller and his colleague, Dr. John Naranja. Dr. John is both an attorney and a doctor.
Workplace bullying and psychological abuse in the workplace is a problem in our workforce here in America. And employers are not incentivized to act preventatively towards bullying behavior in the workplace. Today on the Hero's Call, we welcome Professor David Yamada, who is taking affirmative steps to end workplace bullying and protect employees against unsafe work environments. Welcome to the Hero's Call.
Thank you so much. It's great to be on the show, and I look forward to our conversation.
I want to start off by saying that this is not the first time that we're meeting, because some 25 years ago, you and I had the opportunity to meet in a very different setting. You were my first-year torts professor in law school. And either I owe you a great deal of thanks because I now practice torts law, or I say you were responsible for the bed that I now sleep in because of it. So I appreciate very much your influence and impact on my life. So thank you for being here today.
Well, Marc, thank you for those kind words. I also have to say it's really great when you can connect back with one of your students literally decades later. And we're both at different points in our life, both at different levels of success. And it's just very gratifying that we've been able to make this connection. And I'm very flattered that you and John would be talking with me in this space today.
So we're here today because workplace bullying. Would you please describe for our listeners, what is workplace bullying?
Workplace bullying is targeted, intentional psychological abuse of an employee by a co-employee or supervisor. I often believe that the worst cases of workplace bullying involve a degree of malicious intent to drive someone out of the workplace, to make their work life miserable, in some cases even to push them out of their livelihood. In terms of specific behaviors, we can look at more overt behavior, the verbally abusive boss, for example, who keeps using all sorts of expletives and explosive language towards oftentimes a subordinate. We can also look at ways in which a boss or coworkers might work behind the scenes to undermine someone's credibility, their reputation, and their performance.
It's kind of like a quid pro quo that we as employees have with our employers, right? We are going to give you our time and our best performance, and we expect in return that you're going to give me a safe work environment. And that's not always the case, is it, David?
No. Employees in the United States and in Massachusetts are not legally entitled to a work environment that is safe from targeted psychological abuse. We have various laws to protect against physical hazards in the workplace. But for the types of behavior that I've been looking at really since the late 1990s, there's a significant gap in the law. To put it in a nutshell, unless you can tie the severe bullying to what we call protected class status that would implicate discrimination laws, such as on the basis of sex and race and those other protected groups, or unless you can tie the bullying to retaliation for engaging in protected whistleblowing activities. Those are the two common areas in which bullying type behaviors may be unlawful. But if it's just generic targeted bullying that is very hard to link to one of those categories, it's largely legal.
So as you may recall from first year torts, when you taught me 25 years ago, and that is still good law here today, that there's really two purposes behind tort litigation and tort law. The one is compensation to make up for the harms caused. But the second and most important, I think, to the community is to deter bad behavior. And so are you suggesting to us and our listeners that up until now, there's no deterrence built into the system, that employers are incentivized to protect employees against this bullying behavior in the workplace?
From a legal standpoint, there is very little incentive for employers to assertively and fairly address reports of workplace bullying.
If there's no accountability for the bullying behavior that is exhibited within a corporate structure, then there's really no reason why they would change their behavior as long as their bottom line's not being affected. So I think that it's really important that we identify, or that you've identified this problem and are looking for solutions to it. So can I ask you though, before we get into that, why is it that you got involved in this area? Can you share with us a little bit about your own origin story and how it is that you ultimately got involved in studying and fighting for the rights of employees against workplace bullying and psychological abuse in the workplace?
Great. So, Mark, as you know, I've taught torts for many years at Suffolk, and I've also been teaching classes in employment law and employment discrimination law. And so it was in the late 1990s, about when you were getting your legal training, about to graduate from Suffolk, that I was reading an online interview with a psychology PhD. His name is Dr. Gary Namey, and his wife, Ruth Namey, Dr. Ruth Namey. The two of them were starting what they called the Campaign Against Workplace Bullying. So I'm reading this online interview. I'm going, what the heck is workplace bullying? And what Gary started to describe in that interview was exactly how I've summarized workplace bullying. It's this collection of overt and covert abusive activities directed at an employee, oftentimes repeated, and causing severe psychological harm. So you hear about this behavior all the time. And I'm in two worlds, the legal profession and higher education. And you got this kind of activity going on all the time. And I spent months researching judicial decisions on legal claims such as intentional infliction of emotional distress. And I saw that the courts were just not willing to let these claims go forward when they were brought against employers for severe bullying behavior. I looked at many other legal angles, and I just concluded that the typical severely bullied worker has no legal recourse. And that's when I decided that it was time to advocate for some legal reform. And that led me to be drafting legislation designed to address this particular problem.
I'm so interested in how you originally were speaking with some clinical healthcare providers and psychologists. And I think that is there something that informed you during this process about the psychological effects of workplace bullying that you could share?
Boy, oh boy, it's such an important question. I have to say that when I started this research, I was looking at it through more of a legal lens. I was looking at it more through a workers' rights lens, as in rights, sort of again from that legal standpoint. I didn't fully understand the devastating psychological effects of this behavior. I don't think I understood it at the ground level the way I have since come to know it, because it's not only in talking to experts, such as folks in clinical psychology and therapists, but it's talking to people who have been in those situations as workers, and to see the same kind of sort of blank stare that they're giving you when they've been severely bullied, and they're experiencing psychiatric conditions that are a result of that abuse.
What are some of the solutions that we can offer in these circumstances? And can you walk us through those, how you went through the through the legal doctrine and found out, hey, there's a legal void here. But then that next heroic step was, okay, there's a legal void. How are we going to save some of the victims of this bullying?
Okay, so the legal step was that conclusion that existing legal protections were not sufficient to protect bullied employees. So again, tort law, for example, you cannot sue in Massachusetts your employer for intentional infliction of emotional distress, which captures a lot of bullying behaviors because our workers' compensation law prevents that. Even in states that provide for these kinds of lawsuits, the courts have been very reluctant to allow workplace-related emotional distress claims to go to trial. So finally, I sat down and I said, somebody's got to write a law, basically. And so I sat down and drafted what we have since tagged the Healthy Workplace Bill that creates a civil legal claim for damages so that a severely bullied employee or former employee, as is often the case, can go to court and seek damages if they can show that they have been subjected to a psychologically abusive work environment that has caused psychological or physical harm. And the model for this in terms of inspiration was the Supreme Court's definition of a hostile work environment for purposes of sexual harassment, except I'm making into more of a generic type of protection, that it doesn't have to be just, say, sexual harassment, but any kind of severe targeted psychological abuse. So that's what I drafted. And this was around 2002, 2003. This has become the sort of the model statute or the template for legal reform efforts in the United States.
If you could share some of the experiences that you've encountered in terms of speaking with the legislators and those types of things, both locally and I'm sure you've spoke nationally as well.
Yeah, so the good news is that a concept that 15 years ago was very foreign to a lot of legislators is now becoming a more familiar presence. The term workplace bullying is now starting to become somewhat mainstreamed in our employee relations vocabulary, but it takes time for that idea to sink in, right? And so the legislators, oftentimes we have to educate them about what this problem has been. Again, the more concrete good news is that variations of this model legislation have been introduced in about 25 or 30 states. A handful of states have taken parts of what I have written to create laws that obligate employers to engage in training and education of their workforce about workplace bullying. However, no state yet has adopted the full statute to the point where there are now legal protections that a worker can sue on and which expose an employer to liability.
Going to those times, it appears you're facing these Goliath corporations, and here you are, professor at the law university. And how does that make you feel when you're facing these giant corporations who are fighting what appears to be the right fight?
Well, it certainly feels at times like an uphill battle, right? However, one of the things that one does in engaging in activities like this for advocacy and change is you start to build coalitions, right? For example, here in Massachusetts, we have had the very strong, consistent support of one of the major public employee unions in the Commonwealth, SEIU-NAGE, and they have made it one of their legislative priorities to support this legislation, which means that some of their expert legislative advocates are in the state house, asking legislators to support the Healthy Workplace bill. So it helps to build that kind of partnership and that support. The costs of psychological abuse, as we've seen with, say, domestic abuse and other forms of mistreatment, that bullying in the workplace will somehow reach a norm where we say, you know what, it's time for the law to step in and say, no, it crosses a line. There should be that incentive for employers to prevent and respond to this. And there should be this opportunity for a severely abused worker to recover some compensation. So we'll get there someday, John, but it's going to take some time, I think. Yeah.
And lastly, Professor Yamada, you spoke a little bit about costs to the individual, but you also identified there's cost to the employer as well.
Yes, we have plenty of research data now available to show that in a workplace that is rife with bullying and related kinds of behaviors, productivity goes down, attrition goes up. We've been talking a lot about quiet quitting. That's one of the buzz phrases going around in the workplace, when workers just feel like they're being treated like dirt, or if they see other colleagues or coworkers being treated abusively, they tend to shut down. So workplace bullying is a lose-lose proposition in terms of what it does to workers and what it does to workplaces. The challenge is that too many workplaces, though, too many employers have not fully grasped what it's doing to their bottom line. And that, if they understood that, they might voluntarily try to tackle some of these behaviors proactively, but too many of them are not. And that's just the reality of things.
I really like the idea of therapeutic jurisprudence with my medical background, because obviously in legal ways or legal techniques, we can actually promote the health and the welfare of our clients and all the community.
Yes, definitely. In looking at therapeutic jurisprudence, I've become more familiar with obviously the clinical psychology side of injury and harm and preventing harm, the medical side, the public health side, right? And I think it's a way of tying together, albeit with many syllables, therapeutic jurisprudence, a perspective that says that those of us who want to see the law be a helpful tool for building a more dignified, even more humane society.
Okay, Professor Yamada, we're looking here at Bill S2723. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
This is the model legislation that I've created to remedy that big void in the law for severe workplace bullying.
And is this the bill that was modeled after the hostile work environment
Yes.
model? Professor Yamada, what are we looking at here?
Here we are testifying before a Massachusetts legislative committee that is hearing the Healthy Workplace bill. This is the part where it just gets down on the ground, right? And you get folks who also share their support of the bill, coming together in these groups to testify at these legislative hearings. And so in that photograph, you see me and two of my colleagues who are co-advocates for this legislation. And that's just, the everyday stuff that we have to do to get our message out.
Professor Yamada, what are we looking at here?
This is a 2-volume book set that took a long time to put together, that was co-edited with Dr. Maureen Duffy, an expert on mobbing and bullying behaviors. And Maureen approached me back around 2015 and said, I would like to put together a multi-contributor book set that looks at bullying and mobbing activities in the workplace from various perspectives, from both an academic and a practice standpoint. And she invited me to be a co-editor with her.
David, can you please share with us, what are we looking at for the future with your legislation and with your efforts to protect employees against workplace bullying?
I think we will reach the day when there is a stronger consensus that workplace bullying should be an unlawful employment practice in the United States. Right now, we are behind many other nations across the globe that have enacted laws that declare this type of behavior to be unlawful. And so the United States is a little bit behind our brother and sister nations around the world. So I see a gradual widening of understanding. Whether understanding translates into wiser, fairer, kinder behavior, I think that the jury is out on a lot of that.
How about specific to the legislation? I know that at some point in time that this legislation was being considered in at least 30 different states.
Mm-hmm.
So do we expect or anticipate that this is going to come back to the forefront and our legislators are going to reconsider and maybe enact this legislation in any one of those 30 states, including here in Massachusetts?
Yes. The bill continues to be active in a number of states, such as Massachusetts, New York, a handful of other states during the current legislative sessions. Here in Massachusetts, the Healthy Workplace Bill advanced through the Labor and Workforce Development Committee, which means it once again got an initial stamp of approval, and it is now poised to be moved to the next level of committee consideration. So the legislation continues on. The question of whether or not we hit that breakthrough path of whether it gets signed into law.
And if I may add my 2 cents when it comes to how can we break through, I see the work that you're doing, looking past the short-term failures and frustrations of not getting this enacted yet, but knowing that you're in it for the long haul and that your commitment to bringing about change and finding ways to protect workers and employees from these known dangerous conditions within the workforce is inspirational, not only to us, given what we do for a living, but I'm sure to many other people out there who know that this is a real problem that needs to be addressed. So on behalf of our team here, I want to thank you for your commitment, for your perseverance, and for your efforts to bring about a more humane and safer workplace. So thank you for everything you're doing. And on a personal level, thank you for being an inspiration to me all these years and helping in one way or another shape the career that I've chosen and for shaping the person that I am. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate you. Thank you.
Well, Mark, that's just a very gracious thing to say. And again, when we get to see our graduates doing neat stuff and helping others, it just reminds me of how privileged I've been to be able to do the work I'm doing. And also just to say, you know, we get a lot of great students at Suffolk, and you're one of those wonderful examples of our graduates. And so it's just a delight to be able to reconnect at this point in our lives and careers in such a wonderful way.
Thank you.
Thank you.